So here at Get Ready to Rock, we're saying hello to somebody who we've wanted to catch up with for some time, actually. And we're saying hello to Chris Ousey. Hello, Chris.
Hi, mate. How you doing?
Oh, nice to talk to you. And Chris is, well, something of a legend in terms of melodic rock since the late 80s, early 1990s. And he's currently fronting the band called Snake Charmer. Now, we'll talk about that, Chris, in a moment's time. But let's talk about your new album, because as we speak, it's officially the release date of Rhyme and Reason. It's out via Escape Music. What gave you the incentive to make a solo record? I think I'm right in saying this is the first that's come out under your name, so it's effectively perhaps your first solo album.
Yeah, I guess so. I did something like it a few years back with a band called The Distance, which, when I say a band, it was myself and a guy called Kenny Loney over in Canada. I think that's the closest to a kind of solo record that I've done in the past. But yeah, this was just something that I just felt the time was right for it. After putting out maybe up to 9-10 albums with Heartland over the years, I just didn't feel it was a good time to put another Heartland record out. And it's always good to kind of write with different people. You can get yourself in a little bit of a rut if you write with the same people constantly. So I just wanted to kind of put it out that I was looking for someone else to write with, and do something different, really.
So you had the incentive to make this album under your own name, but what provided the catalyst for this? You know, what brought, we can talk about the musicians on the album, but what brought everything together?
Well, I just went through a period where, as I say, I was looking for someone else to write with. We talked about, the record company and I talked about all kinds of things, maybe writing with Steve Overland from FM, which is something that I'll probably be doing in the future. That was one of the things that might have happened. It just felt like a good time for me to have more of a say in the type of songs that I wanted to record. I wanted the things to go a little bit heavier. And I just wanted to explore doing something different, and the record company seemed to think that it was a good time to do that.
Your albums that came out sort of post 1994 really came out on Escape Music, so you did have that connection. And but you've got some great names on this album. Mike Slammer, of course, from X of City Boy, and Tommy Denander, seems to be on a lot of melodic rock albums coming out of Sweden these days, and of course your colleague Neil Murray.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously initially I talked with Tommy. He sent me 4 or 5 backing tracks over, and they just blew me away. The man is extremely talented, there's no doubt about it. I hadn't heard much about him, which, having then listened to his backing tracks, I'm amazed I didn't know more about him really over the years. And I was just blown away with it. Started writing, I guess, in summer 2009, sometime around then, and then went over to record with him in 2010, and we got like a house on fire. I asked Neil whether he wanted to get involved on the bass, and he was great about it. He listened to the demos, and he was keen to do it. Can't remember who suggested Greg Bissonette on drums. I think it may have been Escape Music, or it may have come through Tommy. But I was really, really pleased that he liked the sound of the recordings that were made and wanted to get involved. And of course, later on, Mike became involved, and that just kind of put the icing on the cake for it for me.
So was there anything that, guided the style of the album? Were you very much led by those early backing tracks, or did you have your own idea, Chris, about how you wanted it to sound?
Well, we talked a little bit about the way it was going to sound. I talked with Escape Music about the way I wanted the record to sound. And I suppose that kind of gave them an idea of the kind of musician I was looking to write with, because over the years I've always written pretty much with a guitarist. And yeah, once I heard, I guess Tommy then would have talked to Escape. He did send over actually quite a mix of stuff. There was some heavier stuff in there, but I mean, I've always liked the melodic side of rock as well. The two things go kind of hand in hand for me, and Tommy just fitted the bill perfectly. The stuff is heavy enough, it's got energy, which I love, It's got drive, but it's also got so much room for melody. And I just love it when those two things come together.
Started off actually playing the track "The Mother of Invention," which is the first track on the album. I think that demonstrates just exactly what you've said. Now, let's move back in time to Heartland. I became aware of the band when I bought several 12-inch singles in the early 1990s, and you were signed to A&M. Tell us a bit about that, because obviously things were looking up for... You'd been in a band called Virginia Woolf, which I think has gone down again in legend as difficult to obtain the... I think it was one album, was it, or maybe two?
Yeah, I think we did two in the end. Self-titled Virginia Woolf, and then an album called Push.
And from that, of course, you developed... How did Heartland develop then?
Well, the first band that I was ever in, I guess as a teenager, was a band called Monroe, going back a long time now. Late 70s, early 80s. Was Virginia Woolf, and then straight after that, that was 1980, Virginia Woolf. But the first band I was ever in, basically, I just started singing in, was a band called Monroe, and the guitarist from that band was a guy called Gary Sharp. So he'd been a friend since I was, I guess, 15 or something. And I just kind of met up with him again, almost out of the blue. I wanted to do some demoing of stuff that I had, and he had his own home studio. So the two things we kind of drifted back together, if you like. And that culminated in the debut Heartland record with A&M in 1990, I suppose it was. Produced by Jim Barton. And the whole thing kind of just went on from there, really.
So were there great sort of aspirations for the band? Because you received quite a big push, didn't you? I seem to remember at the time.
A&M Records were extremely keen on the band right from the beginning. We were really lucky to get the right record company behind us and the right amount of backing. And when Jim Barton came in to produce the record, I mean, it was almost like an open, and it seems ridiculous in this day and age, but it was almost like an open wallet. It was, whatever you want to do with this band to record them, it's okay with us, And that just doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't happen anymore. We were so lucky with that one. But it was a little bit of all eggs in one basket kind of thing. Quite a big budget went into the recording of that record, and there was always the feeling that it was going to be all or nothing. That album was either going to rock it or it wasn't, and it was no real surprise to us. When A&M didn't want to go forward with a second album after the first album didn't really get at the time and just a big enough sales, to be honest with you. But it seems strange now looking back, because that album now is kind of grown in people's minds, and it's become, to some people, a bit of a classic of that sort of a genre. But at the time, it was rock music was very difficult to sell as it can be now. Yeah.
I mean, of course, you'll remember as well around that time. I mean, you had bands like Dare, didn't you, from the UK? And no end of bands from the States, and of course then grunge kicked in and everybody sort of hit the decks, really, didn't they? It was it was just bad timing. But yeah, I do remember certainly had some rather impressive looking, certainly the 12-inch singles, because that was the era, wasn't it, for packaging, really?
It was, yeah. And they did a good job with it, there's no doubt about it. I've got no complaints with the way that we were handled by A&M at that time. They had a lot of belief in the band.
Get ready to rock radio.
Now, what happened, Chris, after Heartland? I mean, you evidently got into session work, but and we should say, of course, we'll come on to talk about the albums you made in the sort of mid to late 1990s and beyond for Escape Music. And in different guises, they were really Heartland albums. In fact, they were called Heartland. But what was happening in the immediate aftermath of Heartland in the early 90s?
Yeah, there was a period. I mean, it was quite a low period for me. I think whenever you've had that kind of support from a major company, and it goes down, there's a period of kind of having to dust yourself off, and you're wondering what the heck you're going to do next, and that can be a difficult period, and it was a difficult period. I even considered at various stages in turning my back on it. Obviously I'm glad I didn't. So yeah, there was a pretty dark period of probably a couple of years where I was Escape Music came forward and wanted to release some demos that we'd written for a possible second Heartland record, which came out as Wide Open on, I think, Long Island Records, and then around 94 on Escape Music. So they came forward, and in a way that kind of, the fact that, all right, they were only a small record company, especially in those days, but there was, again, a lot of faith in what I'd done in the past, and when people kind of approach you and they have your best interests at heart like that, it kind of makes you think, well, you know what, if other people are prepared to make the effort, then I should be prepared to make the effort. When I met up with Steve Morris, the guitarist who obviously I did the rest of the Heartland albums with.
Right. Now, most recently, coming more up to date, you've hooked up with what was called Monsters of Rock with Mickey Moody and Neil Murray, ex of the early formation of Whitesnake, and this seems to have morphed now into the band called Snake Charmer. I should mention that you've got a support slot with Uriah Heep in December. We're talking now in November 2011, and you have a showcase in London at the Dean Street Studios. It's an invite only to launch the band, I presume, and I gather you've also got new material.
Yeah, it's been really good. It's gone quite quickly. In 2000 and last year, we signed up with a new management company, QED Management. We haven't done many gigs this year. It's all been about writing and recording. We've got 2 new tracks now ready to go. They've just been finished yesterday. We've recorded a couple of the old classic tracks. I mean, more as a way of getting some interest for gigs next year. So we're hoping to do a lot more gigs next year. But we're now kind of tentatively looking towards writing and releasing an album, I hope, next year.
Certainly makes it more relevant, does it, for audiences, because it's there's always a bit of a reaction, isn't there, to something like this as it's a very good tribute, obviously, because you've got people who played in original bands, but it's only when that new material comes through that people really take notice, don't they,
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it was never meant really to be a tribute kind of band. Obviously, as 2 of the members are original members of Whitesnake, and the majority of the songs that we're playing live were co-written by Mickey Moody. So I think it's relevant to that extent. But I guess until you introduce live music into it, it doesn't become a band in its own right.
No, that's right. Now, how did you get involved in the first place with... I remember Monsters of Rock. You did a gig in at the Cambridge Rock Festival. I think you mentioned 2010.
Yeah.
That may well have been one of your first gigs, actually. But, certainly a big gig. But how, before that, how did you all get together?
Well, I think there'd been other bands around the same sort of idea beforehand that I wasn't particularly aware of. With Mickey and Neil.
Because we should mention there, just to cut you off a little bit, Chris, M3, that was going around about 2004, 2005.
Yeah, I was kind of vaguely aware that I hadn't met Mickey or Neil at the time. I just got a phone call from an old mate of mine who used to be in the first band that I was ever in, a guy called Pete Dutton, who now does the out front sound for the band and has his own production company. And he said that my name had come up when they were looking to put a band together, and that they'd be interested in having me come down to a rehearsal. So I went down to John Henry's rehearsal rooms in London about January 2010, and met up with the rest of the guys. Harry James, great drummer on the Thunder, Laurie Weisfield, obviously Nick, Neil and Mickey. And it just gelled. The whole thing just gelled, and it was fun. Having spent a lot of time over the years writing and recording more than really playing live, and I've not played live enough for my kind of wants. So it was just a lot of fun to get in a rehearsal room with musicians of that sort of standard, of that caliber, and but not take it over seriously. Do it for the fun of doing it, and I really enjoyed it. I knew pretty much immediately from that rehearsal that the band could go out and have a lot of fun playing classic songs that are relevant to the band.
What's been the reaction to some of those, to from the audience, really, hearing some of those classic tracks again? I mean, that represents quite a challenge for you as a vocalist, because at least at the moment you've been, there's a fair bit of Whitesnake in the set list. How did you approach that, Chris, in terms of interpretation?
Strangely, I think other people worry about that more than I do. I think at the end of the day, whenever I step up to the mic to sing any song, obviously if it's someone else's material, I'm aware of the past that song has. But when I step up to the mic, I'm basically thinking, how do I get the best out of this song with my voice? How do I interpret the lyrics, and how do I, you know what I mean? It's all about trying to get the best out of a good song, as far as I'm concerned. Although it'd be silly to say that I'm not aware that people in the audience are waiting, probably, Whitesnake fans of old, and are waiting for me to open my mouth on the first line. But once you step up to the mic, you're thinking about the song. You're not thinking about people's expectations. I think if you were, the job would be made 50 times more difficult. So for me, it's about walking to the mic, or when I'm recording, it's about just getting the best out of the song that I can possibly get with my voice, rather than trying, to come up to someone else's expectations, to be honest.
I think what you're saying really is being yourself, isn't it? Because it's too easy, probably, to try and emulate others, and that wouldn't be natural, would it?
Not at all. I mean, if I go back to, when I was in my late teens, perhaps, that sort of period of time, Coverdale was a really big influence on me as a vocalist. I had, I guess, a holy trinity of vocalists: Paul Rodgers, Ian Gillan, Coverdale, and they were really important to kind of the way that I developed as a singer. But once you get sort of beyond your 20s and your mid-20s, you're listening to music less because you're playing more and you're writing more, and you develop your own style.
Yes. And you mentioned influences. You mentioned Whitesnake. Now, that would have probably coincided with some classic Whitesnake of that period. So who else were you listening to at that time, when you were first getting into music, really, on a more serious level? Well,
I like a lot of musicians. I was kind of influenced by an older sibling. I had an older brother who was bringing records into the house when I was, 13, 14. And a lot of those records were kind of, certainly on the rock side of things, I was listening to a lot of Deep Purple by the time I was 14, 15. I loved Free, Bad Company, those kind of bands. But also lots of other stuff, lots of other different influences. There's a couple of the albums from the Tubes that I was absolutely head over heels with at the time. A heck of a lot of stuff, Black Sabbath. A lot of the usual suspects, really, but Judas Priest, a lot, and mostly, obviously, selfishly listening to it as a vocalist. So a lot of the bands that I listened to, obviously, I was attracted to them because of some great, strong vocalists.
Yes. Did you mention the Tubes there?
Yeah, there's a couple of albums that I really like. The Inside Out Side Principle, I think it's called, would be one of them. Again, just strong vocals, strong melodic vocals, but with attitude. I mean, the studio stuff was, to me, it was crafted so well.
This is radio for the internet age. Get ready to rock radio.
It's fascinating that, when you talk to a performer who's come through the sort of classic period, let's say, late 80s, early 90s especially, in terms of record label promotion and, bigger budgets. But how are you going about promoting this music these days? Because I have to say, this is one of the best melodic rock albums I've heard this year. The best of its kind, really. Good songwriting, great singing, of course, and fantastic musicianship. But there must be a fear that it just merges into one of many of this genre that's out there,
Yeah, I mean, it is. There aren't the budgets for big promotions anymore. I think the most you can kind of hope for is that you basically just keep at it and keep the standards as high as you possibly can. And I'm really pleased with this album. I'm really proud of it. I really don't want it, obviously, to merge in with the rest. I'm really hoping at some point that we can get some live dates out of this record. I'm determined one way or the other to play some of this stuff live, because it's crying out for that to be done. Logistically, it becomes more difficult when you've got obviously members of this band living, on different continents, basically. I mean, I'd love to get Flamer over, do some live dates. We talked about the possibility of doing that. So, I mean, you never know. You've just got to keep at it, and I do hope to get this stuff on stage at some point. And certainly, I'm looking to write another within the next. I'll start probably 6 months from now, something like that. Writing another in the same vein, and I hope with at least a very similar lineup, if not every single member the same.
I mean, it's great to hear you say that. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it, to play those songs live?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, I'm also in a great position from that point of view, in that I have so many songs to choose from to play live from the Heartland records. Obviously, at this stage, you're only looking at 12 new songs for the solo album, but you play 6 of those live and throw in some of the Heartland stuff, and I think it would be an enjoyable set to play, and I hope an enjoyable set to come and see.
People will hear you playing with Snake Charmer, and then hopefully investigate your previous albums, and especially the most recent one. It has that effect.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it works for both acts. That's usually the way it works. I don't like doing too many things at once, because it worries me that you kind of have to drop some standards in what you're doing. But the two things are quite different, so I don't see any problems doing the two things in tandem, and I hope the two things will complement each other.
Now, just to conclude, this year Escape Music, we've mentioned, because this is the new album is on this label. You've also recorded several albums as Heartland, with Steve Morris, who you've mentioned, on guitar. Now, this year came a 2-disc compilation, Travelling Through Time, and that includes tracks from the album you mentioned earlier, Wide Open 1994, which I think I'm right in saying was the intended second album follow-up, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was basically a bunch of demos ready for a second record if we decided to go in and do that.
You mentioned Steve Morris. He's had a parallel life with the likes of Ian Gillan, particularly his solo work. But has that sort of stymied the development of Heartland, really, since the late 90s? Because he's had these commitments, you haven't been able to focus on, the band totally.
I don't know, really. I think over the years, Heartland almost, it had a life of its own, in that it became more of a studio band, and the band was often the band changed quite a lot over the years. Different people coming in and out, which can be a good thing. In that it's great to play with other people, but it also dilutes sometimes the feel of a band. And over the years, Heartland has become to feel a little bit like a studio band for me, almost like a project instead of a band, which wasn't the way I really wanted it to be in the beginning. And whilst I'm proud of the records that we've put out, I really don't feel that we were out there chasing those records up. Not enough gigs. Certainly would have liked to have been out playing live more. But it just kind of grew into more of a studio thing. And I suppose you're trying to keep busy. You're constantly trying to write. And then the record company are looking for another record, and you can get on a little bit of a roller coaster. And before you know it, you're 9 albums down the line and wondering what to do next. So I wouldn't say that there will never be another Heartland record, but certainly I'd like to be involved with something that was a little bit more hands-on from a live point of view, and a little bit more of a band situation.
Get ready to rock radio. Music you want to hear.
Because it's really fascinating, Chris, what you were saying about, perhaps you haven't done as much live work as you would have liked over the years.
Yeah,
and certainly Snake Charmer's going to push you right into, literally into the spotlight. But that's another dimension that I'm sure you'll relish that sort of opportunity. It's like another aspect, isn't it, really?
Definitely. I mean, it's great also from the vocal point of view. It's a different technique. There are different techniques to singing live than singing in the studio, and they're pretty subtle. Like, an audience perhaps might not see those changes, but it's a different thing, and it's a really joyful thing. In the studio, you're constantly thinking about the minor details. The devil really is in the detail in the studio. Live, you can kind of let your hair down and move pretty much with the spirit of the thing, rather than take a scalpel to everything. And that is great. That is a joy, no doubt about it. And I'm hoping I do a heck of a lot more of that. I've never actually been people laugh when I walk into the studio. To be honest with you, I can't wait to walk out of it again. It's quite. I don't know. You're staring at a mixing desk. It doesn't fill you with. It doesn't fill you with joy. You get in the studio, you record the thing, and you hope that will lead on to actually being able to put that music in front of people. Obviously, there's nothing like getting halfway through a set and the guitarist is kicking into a solo, and you can step back and you can look at the audience. And if that's an audience with smiles on their face, it might sound corny, but that really is what makes it worthwhile. You kind of feel like you're doing something that's bringing a bit of joy, and that is great. And then that pushes you on to do another record in the hope that you can do that again. And there's not been quite enough of that in what I've been doing recently.
We say to you, Chris, from all of us here at Get Ready to Rock, thank you for your time talking to us. And most of all, good luck in the coming months with both the solo album and Snake Charmer.
Thanks, mate. Been a pleasure.